That music you're hearing, that's what people who listen just to the podcast version of this receive. So if you're just a regular podcast version listener, edition listener, that sounds normal to you. But if you're on the live stream, Dan, our podcast producer, is playing that music in live. He's on with us. I'm Doug Padgett. That's Rob Ryerson. And there is Dan Dietrich. And our daily podcast is this chance for us to look around the world, see what's going on, and see what we can do in light of it. How we can let our light shine, as we like to say around here. And on Tuesdays, we talk about politics. And you know what I've been struck by, Rob? I've been struck by this need that we have, obviously at Vote Common Good, which puts out this podcast, for a common good political movement. And just how hard that is, right? Because political parties play identity for people. They form and function identity. And there are some people who feel very well settled in their political identity. Some people are really frustrated with their past political identity. And their set of options, they don't feel very good about them. And then there's a whole bunch of people who really feel politically homeless. They feel like they don't really fit quite anywhere. And that's the group that Vote Common Good wants to work with, and that we specifically want to see if we can inject a common good criteria for voting that might do something different than political parties. I don't know. That's what's interesting. So we'll talk about that today in the midst of the rest of our roundup. I am sitting down in Minneapolis again. I was just recognizing that it's been like 10 podcasts in a row where I've been sitting, because I try to do every other one standing and sitting. And sitting is a bad habit. I've heard it's the smoking of the 21st century. So I'm just going to damage myself apparently for another hour here on this podcast. If you're watching on the live stream, tell us where you're doing what you're doing. Tell us if you're standing, sitting, what city, state, country you're in. We'd love to hear from you. Hey, back to you, Rob. Good morning. Good morning, Dan. And,
hey, Doug.
The music is still lovely.
I have some exciting news to share as we kick things off here with the our political podcast. Not that this should be a political thing, but sadly it's become a political thing. But the state of Arkansas, where I am sitting currently, added clergy to the list of people who can get vaccinated. And so on Saturday, my wife and I are going to get vaccinated, heading down to the Sam's Club to get vaccinated.
So we were joking about this before we came on. Literally the Sam's Club.
Yes. And for those that might not know,
Sam's retailer.
Yes, I live here in Walmart country. Walmart headquarters is here, and Sam's Club is their kind of version of Costco or BJ's. And so heading down to the Sam's Club to get my a very large dose of my COVID vaccine.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. Is I'm
going to get 16 COVID vaccines, in fact, on Saturday.
Yeah, that was what I was wondering. Is you don't have to choose when you go to Sam's Club. You get all 3 vaccines and the large hot dog and that gigantic drink, all for $1.99. I mean, there's something about this moment, right, where we're in the middle of a very deadly global pandemic. Then still the number one cause of death in the country is the COVID virus. It's caused the life expectancy of African Americans, I think, to decline like 3 or 6 years. For the general population, 1.5 years. It is devastating. And we've done everything we can, right, to try to mitigate and to deal with it after 9 months of bungling from the past administration. And the fact that the solution to that is somehow delivered via a Sam's Club just is the I think the quintessential antidote to this whole antidote. What am I saying right now?
I don't know. The vaccine is the antidote, so it's an anecdote about an antidote.
It's an anecdote about the antidote. Yeah, I was getting anecdote and antidote. Oh boy, maybe I should just stick with English. It is like the perfect moment to describe where we all find ourselves in just the craziness of the simplicity of the distribution system. But glad to hear that in Arkansas, clergy are considered essential workers and are in front of someone. So, but look, it's as good as, the DoorDash people, I guess, that also have to interact with human beings and with other people. And my friend Laura Truex, I guess our mutual friend, she's in Indiana, lives technically in Indiana, works in Chicago. And Indiana has the whole time had clergy. And I kind of made a little like comment about it, like, wow, I wonder why that is. And she said, well, if you think about it, we do end up interacting with a lot of people. There's, a whole set of things from funerals and just a lot of human contact. And it makes sense, which kind of made me wonder, why are clergy in other places? What's wrong with Minnesota?
Yeah,
well,
and
we're not as Christian nationalist here, so we don't really give that much benefit to the religious people. We're a little less that way.
Other states, I had noticed. I had noticed Pennsylvania was one of those states where clergy were at the top of the list, and in other states, and I was a little surprised and disappointed to see that wasn't the case here in Arkansas. But now we are, and we're going to take advantage of that fact to do our part and get vaccinated because we love our neighbors.
Hey, did you see that in Idaho, some people had put together
a mask burning
for children, and the two of the people who helped organize this thing did a YouTube video, and they were mocking masks. These were state representatives or state senators mocking masks in a way that I was just unfamiliar. Like, I knew there were I don't wear a mask, I think they're ridiculous. I just had no idea that an elected official of a state could be so brazen and call people out to burn masks, not to not wear them, not to have a big party where they don't wear them, but to act as if these are banned books from other era of our life, or the fictional bra of the feminist movement of the 1960s, which, as it turns out, no one ever burned bras. That was a derogatory term, but it's in people's minds that there were bra burning episodes. Like, that you would have a public display where, first of all, let me just rant about this for a second. They put out burn barrels, which I didn't know a lot about burn barrels until I listened to a podcast called Shit Town, S-Town.
Now we just got an explicit label on our podcast.
Wouldn't that be great?
S-Town was such a great podcast. That was so fascinating.
So great. But that's where I learned about burn barrels, because I just didn't know them. So a burn barrel is where you take one of those big 50-gallon barrels and you heat them up very hot. So you can just burn lots of things. The kind of smoke that comes out when you take those masks that are not just cotton and burn them is terrible toxins that children are standing around the burn barrels. So there is something happening in our political movement that is sort of the comical from, like, head over to Sam's Club, pick up a set of tires, a extra large container of pretzel sticks, and get your vaccine while you're there. And let's burn masks as a public statement of defiance. I don't know. It is. I know this has gone on all along in our society. I know that, but it also feels like when these things come up that, man, we could be better than all this. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be like this.
Yeah, it's really. I'm with you. It feels like at times this stuff is out there, but then when you actually see it, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. I watched and I think I shared with you a TikTok video this week of a woman who is absolutely convinced that Joe Biden is not in the White House, but is actually on a movie set made to look like the White House. And the media is going along with it, and everyone's just pretending he's the president when, in fact, Donald Trump is still president of the United States. And I'm just like, this can't be real. This can't be real.
This can't be real.
Except it is. Except it is.
Everywhere.
And maybe this is one of the, and I don't want to turn this into like an anti-social media rant, but maybe this is one of those things that the information age in social media and the ubiquitousness of video, leaves us with this, like, we can see all of this. This stuff has always been here. There have always been wackos. There have always been people with fringe ideas. Mm-hmm. There hasn't always been a very easy platform for them to broadcast those things. And, what used to be, sitting talking on their ham radio or, chatting with friends around, if they have friends around their, I don't mean to be dismissive, but, around their dining room table, now they can broadcast it out and, millions of people can see it because it continues to be, shared and shared and shared. It is, it is an interesting, scary time that we live in.
Yeah. Yeah. And we should do a whole conversation sometime about the role of social media in political identity.
Yes.
I think that
and
would be very
polarization.
interesting. And I think it's a little more complicated. There were some very dangerous political identities that put people's lives at risk, and people believed all kinds of things that were false and untrue long before this. And in some ways, I mean, I'm not sure if it's the technology or the users. Like, we need to use the anyway, I think that would be an entire conversation for us to have. Hey, you had just a couple of other quick political moments, political notes before we get into the heart of this topic today.
Yeah, just little things in the news. Did you hear the very sad news that the Champ and Major are headed back to Delaware?
The Champ and Major are the dogs of the first dogs.
The first dogs, and I believe it's Champ. Champ, I think, is 3, and Major, I think, is 13. Champ is a rescue dog, the first rescue dog to ever live in the White House, which is really kind of a wonderful thing. Except he bit a security agent. There was a biting incident in the White House. And apparently the dogs have been getting, in Champ in particular, more and more aggressive, running and jumping. And so, for the safety of the public and those that work at the White House, the first dogs didn't last the first 100 days. This is really this is a big deal because for, the first dogs have been a big story for, Biden supporters. There was always this criticism of Trump, as a first president in forever that didn't have a pet in the White House, didn't have a dog in the White House. And how terrible is this that there is no dog in the White House, as if a dog in the White House, will, make terrible policies go away. And then there was this report on Newsmax a week or two ago where they were complaining that the presidential dogs were too dirty to be in the White House, that they were, they didn't look presidential enough, these presidential dogs. And now we learn that the presidential dogs have to leave the White House. It's really, I don't know. Doug, how do you feel about this news? The Champ and Major are being deported to Delaware.
I think dog biting is a real problem. It scares the life out of me. And I'm kind of glad that we take seriously the love and affection that people have for their animals, and that we take dog biting really seriously, because it really is a big problem, right? Yeah. And so I am glad that there's maturity in the White House. I'm glad that, just like every other family, they have to deal with the fact that sometimes an animal behaves in a way where that animal needs to be in an environment where the animal can behave in a way that's safe and good for the animal.
Yeah. And I'd just like to say this, that when you just said, unironically, I take dog biting seriously, I almost spit my coffee out of my mouth. That was absolutely hilarious. So the other piece of news, did you see that Donald Trump and his political PAC, Save America, sent a cease and desist letter to the Republican Party?
Yeah, telling them that they cannot use his name or likeness to raise money for the Republican Party. Only to America First PAC will he allow his image to be, which I'm sure is not, he is a public figure at a degree that, no, you can use Donald Trump's photo and name as a public figure without his permission. He can't tell you not to use it. But the fact that he would say to other Republicans, don't you raise money off of my name. I will be raising money off of my name only at donaldjtrump.com is right. That's the other side of it. He's not just saying, don't you use my name. He's saying, I can use my name and you can't. So, and this is all the kind of stuff that makes you crazy, right? Around politics.
Exactly. And their response was like, no, we're going to keep doing it. They just totally ignored him. It's so fun. Like, this is a weird thing to me, because I'm like, did he think that they would stop? Like, does a lawyer not say, like, listen, they have that they have that right. Like, this is just going to make you look petty and foolish if you send this cease and desist letter, because it's going to get out there. Like, it's not going to make a difference. All it can do is make you look petty. It's It's really a strange thing.
Or to all the Trump supporters who run these political parties at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
They will say we're not going to raise money for the Republican Party. We're going to direct people to his PAC. I think what he's doing is he's posturing his own PAC to take all of that money. And by the way, it's my belief, because I've heard this from other reporting, what he's doing with that money is using it to pay his own legal bills. So a great percentage of the money is earmarked for legal bills that he has taken on because of his impeachable behavior as the president of the United States, and because he's under multiple investigations as individual one in a number of federal crimes, and he's going to use the money for his own legal defenses. This is where it gets. So if he could squeeze $1 million, $5 million, $10 million away from Republicans over to him, he doesn't care if he looks petty. This is not a man for whom looking petty has been his primary concern.
It's really wonderful to hear that Rudy Giuliani might finally get paid for his legal services of Donald Trump. It's just in this continuing narrative of, is the Republican Party going to split? And as you know, I'm of the opinion that it is far more likely for the Democratic Party to split than the Republican Party to split. But there is this continuing narrative in the media. Is the Republican Party going to split? Is the Patriot Party, the MAGA Party, going to be a thing? Are Never Trumpers going to leave the Republican Party? This certainly does not help that narrative go away, that all is hunky-dory under the big tent of republicanism. And so, you know, it's going to be interesting to continue to monitor and see kind of what happens in the Republican Party and how they're going to, you know, function into the future. And I don't know if this is a good transition into some of the things we're going to talk about, particularly with one Republican leader trying to make peace with, you know, what a post-Trump Republican Party looks like and what that relationship is.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing, that the role of political parties is complex. There are multiple political parties in the United States. So a lot of times people believe there's only two. There's not only two. There are a dozen or more fully registered, recognized at the national level political parties. Some that can be on every ballot, some that have to be on others. So there are many political parties, and there's many individuals who don't identify with one. But the difference between being a member of a party and feeling at home in a political party, those are different things. I'm not talking about membership per se. So there's a lot of people would be like, hundreds of people you and I have talked to in the work that we've done of Common Good over the years will tell us, I don't see myself as a member of the Republican Party. And then you ask them, for whom have you voted? And it's been Republicans their entire lives. But they feel at home there, even though they're not part of the party, right? It's our relationship to political parties is kind of curious. And that's not my greatest level of interest. Like, can we get a third party or a fifth party or a ninth party to gain some kind of national level? Because the American populace fundamentally doesn't want that. We want there to be 1, 2, or 3 candidates that we're going to choose between, right? So there's been a number of times where there's been a third party national, federal candidate for president on our ballot just in the last, 40 years. So that exists. We all know that that's the case. That's something different about how people feel about their own political identity, how they see themselves. So when we've raised this question here, what's the role of political parties, and is there a chance for a common good movement among political parties? It's not, are you a member of one and you have to follow? It's, how do you see yourself, right? And I take this actually from how you and I and lots of others have talked about Christianity in America. Like, I've been a pastor, as you have, for a long time, and I know there's an awful lot of people who, when they think about their faith, they don't even like to think of themselves inside of a religious movement, even inside of a religion, right? They want to be about a religion of love and a religion of goodness and a religion of human thriving, all that's taught by Jesus or by other spiritual teachers. So some people aren't even comfortable talking about their own religion or their own faith inside of a religious construct, let alone their politics being bound up inside of a religious party. And this is one of the sets of conditions that, while they've existed in the United States before now, and there certainly isn't the only time we've ever had one of these moments, but this is particular right now. It's a thing that we're all facing, is this question: how do I view myself in relationship to the political options that are available? And that's a question that I think is really complicated, and that a lot of us are trying to reckon with. And I've got a little, I got a little taxonomy I'll throw out here in a minute, but that's really the question. And I hope our listeners now, and those who share this around, will start thinking about that, right? Thinking about their own sense of political identity in relationship to political parties. Not asking the question, what does the political party sort of tell me I have to hold to, and then do I agree with the party or not? But what do you bring to the party as a voter?
Here, let me give you an illustration of maybe how this works. So here in the state of Arkansas, where I am, you can register as a Republican, you can register as a Democrat, you can, I think the only other party that is officially recognized here in Arkansas is the Libertarian Party, or you can be unaffiliated, which is essentially independent. 89% of voters in the state of Arkansas, registered voters, 89% of registered voters in the state of Arkansas are independents, are unaffiliated, are not a member of a political party. In my particular district, only 9% are Republicans and 4% are registered Democrats. And at that same time, this is a state that goes overwhelmingly Republican in the voting. So you look at those numbers and you think, okay, well, this is a independently minded state. These are people who, are going to think for themselves, who are maybe, so you could expect maybe to see some flip-flopping in how things vote and in how votes go. You can, imagine that you'd have kind of some split government, that this might be a purple state in some way, but the reality is it is bright red. The very best Democrat on the ballot is going to top out at 35% of the vote. And over 60% of which is in political terms is an overwhelming majority, is a landslide victories. And at the same time, 89% registered independents, unaffiliated. And so I wonder, when we think about identity, there's that like, I like your analogy of like, I'm spiritual, but not religious kind of thing. There's that like, and so I wonder, is there some sense in which people are on one level want to think of themselves as fair-minded, as open-minded, as independent, and yet at the same time really have a more ingrained identity that they could not imagine voting, differently than they always have. I wonder if there's some way in which people are somewhat self-deceived, and that makes this work really difficult to do, to get people. I can say very clearly, like I am a Cleveland Browns fan. Like I have, like, very clearly, I identify that identity that I have. And it's going to be, it's going to be difficult to get me to change that. But like, if you know that about me, then like, okay, we've got a starting point to have a conversation. If I don't even know, if I'm not conscious of the identity that I actually have, I wonder how difficult it is to get somebody to shift that identity, to change, to be open to something else, because they think I'm open-minded when in fact they're not.
Yeah, so let's chase down that. That's a great little analogy there, right? Let's chase that for a second. So I live in Minnesota. I'm not a NFL fan. I choose not to follow sports. I meet people who, when they find out that I live in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, they will say, and it's a regular statement, oh, so you're a Vikings fan. So they view the world through the lens of fandom as related to professional football. So they meet a stranger and then they say, oh, as a point of conversation and common interest, oh, you must be a Vikings fan. And then when I say, well, I do live there, almost all my life, but I don't really follow football. I'm not really a football fan of anyone. For a lot of people, they don't know how to register that, right? Because their view of the world is maybe it's just what they see in sort of, how I identify myself in the world, that a middle-aged man is going to be a football fan of some kind, but you're not going to be one. And then the conversation gets awkward and has to move on to other things. This is what I think happens to a lot of political people, right? They're like, they are supposed, and it's put upon them, that there's a political identity that goes along with something about them. And that's and it might even, something about them might even be who they voted for in the past. Right. So you and I, we do a lot of political work. We know that your pattern of behavior of who you voted for in the past is the greatest indicator of what political party you're going to vote for in the future. We don't tend to change our behavior as much as we sort of, act like we would. Because truth be told, had the Vikings been in the Super Bowl, I might have watched it with a different level of interest than, like there's something in even though I'm not a fan and I like to identify myself as a non-fan, I'm in. And this is what happens with our political identities. Most of us spend more time curating up the other parts of our identity than we do our political identity. In fact, I was talking to somebody named Katie Paris, who runs a really great online community called Red, Wine, and Blue. And it's a couple 100,000 women that are specifically, it's a women's group on Facebook who connect around issues of politics, the common good, and wine. And they're great. I mean, they just do such great work. And we were talking about this the other day, how most people don't see themselves as political. She said, yeah, I hear it all the time. Like somebody will be like organizing with us for 6 months or a year, and someone will say to them like, so when did you become political? And they'd say, oh, I'm not really political. I mean, I'm kind of working on that. So the identity is about self-perception, self-identity, how you describe yourself. And this is the question that I think sits at the real root of what we're doing in our society. And can we help people to develop a voting identity, a political identity that is common good related? And that's what I hope, that's what I think we can do. And then its association to political parties and to particular candidates is a behavior that can sit independent from how someone views themselves and how they want to understand the world. Now that's a level that now that starts sounding like a political science class, right? Where there's a kind of stuff that people in political science classes would talk about.
Now, I want to dig a little bit into this idea of a common good political identity, because I think it's a bit different than how people often think of political identities. I think very often people think of political identities, so if it's not party oriented, then it's ideological. It's I'm a progressive, or I'm a conservative, I'm a libertarian, I'm and not, a member of the Libertarian Party, but like a small L, libertarian. I'm a leftist. I'm a socialist. I'm a centrist or a moderate. And I think people often identify themselves ideologically. And I think there's, famously, Mike Pence would say, I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, in that order. And there's people who put their ideological identity ahead of their partisan identity, and they only want to be a part of a party that is consistent with their ideology. And I get this all the time, where people say to me, because I identify as a progressive Republican, and people say to me all the time, like, that's not a thing. Like that's not like what even is that? And I'm like, yeah, it is a thing. And I am proof that it's a thing. I'm, here I am. I might be the only one, but here I am. And I know I'm not the only one. So I think, people put their ideology their political philosophy, whether it's well developed or not, whether it's consistent or not. And there are within conservative, there are, there are shades of that and versions of that. Within progressive, there are shades of that and versions of that. Like, so we understand that this is complicated and we're kind of painting with broad strokes. But when we talk about a common good political identity, it's not necessarily ideological.
Right.
It's not, at least I'm, from my understanding and where I would come from, it's not necessarily about a laundry list of policies of, okay, we check the box that we support this, and we support this, and we support this, and we support this. It rather is a way of being in the political world. It is an orientation of life that says the thing that animates my political involvement is less what's good for me and rather what's good for all.
Yeah.
And I think that's really significant because so often people are motivated politically by what's in it for me. And I'm not, and I don't want to necessarily be critical of that, because I think that there are major segments of our population and our society in which I would strongly encourage them to, speak loudly and boldly for the rights and the opportunities that have been denied them for some reason. And so, being loudly and strongly saying, no, I am here, I deserve this, I need to be on equal footing. Absolutely. Our work, particularly with white evangelicals and white Catholics, we're not talking about a group that has been marginalized, right? There's a persecution complex that exists, but we're not talking about a group that needs to stand up for its rights because it has been sidelined in some way.
That's right.
And so this is a group that needs to have a posture of humility, that needs to have a posture of what's not what's best for me, but what's best for everybody. It's not about who's going to give me the biggest tax cut. I had a conversation with a guy the other day who said to me, he's like, yeah, I vote my pocketbook. And that was it. And he's like, I'm a conservative because I vote my pocketbook. And that there was nothing beyond that there was no concern other than how much money do I get to have?
Yes.
How much money do I get
and there
to
was
keep?
I just saw a study. I wish I had pulled it up because it would give some credence to this, that evangelicals were polled and they responded that their choices politically, the question was, how much do you take into consideration of the impact on other people in your own political choices? And evangelicals were the least, by percentages, the least likely to say, my voting decisions are based on what's good for others. There is a particular problem that exists. And this is what makes political homelessness powerful to people, is that they're not sure where they find themselves and they're looking for a narrative. It has nothing to do with if they voted for Joe Biden or not. I'm very comfortable as seeing myself firmly rooted in the Democratic Party now, right? I didn't used to be as comfortable being in the Democratic Party. I now find myself very importantly feeling like I need to be in the Democratic Party for lots of reasons. But I know that there's other people for whom that's a movement. Yeah.
I was going to say, you live in the Democratic Party house. I sleep on the couch.
You rent it occasionally as an Airbnb. I'm paying the mortgage. I'm carrying the weight. All right. So here's a little taxonomy that I put together. I think it's helpful. There's, at least in our work, there's 3 voter profiles that I've been thinking about. And now Republicans might think about this differently. If they want candidates to vote for Republicans, they would think about it differently. I want people to vote for Democrats right now, right? I think that personally, I believe that the Republican Party has forfeited its right to offer itself as a common good party, just over and over in the last 4 years, from state legislatures all the way through senators. and presidential candidates, it has, in my view, forfeited the narrative of the common good, all for the narrative of power and of 50% plus one and so on. So I think there's three voter profiles. There's a group of people who are Democratic leaning. They should vote for Democrats. The Republican Party or the Democratic Party should work for them. They should recruit them. They should now get them. I would put myself in that top category, right? Like the Democratic Party should work hard to be sure that I'm going to vote for every candidate and all that. Then there's a second group. This is a group that I refer to as the Republican frustrated voter. This is one who's like, I'm a Republican, but I can't stand this current batch of Republicans. You might be in that category, right?
That's me. Yeah.
These people who would say, I'm not willing to give up my Republican identity. What I want to do is make the Republican Party better. So Adam Kissinger, I don't even know if we're going to watch a video clip here in a minute from Lindsey Graham, who's a very famous senator. He might find himself in that category. Certainly the Lincoln Project, the Republican voters against Trump, all of that crowd, the never Trumper Republicans firmly there. Lots of people working in those top two groups. There's a lot of attention paid to those two groups. What a lot of people in the top group are trying to do is get the Republican frustrated people to move up into the Democratic leaning going to vote for them anyway. I actually think each one of these three has a totally different narrative and totally different strategies are responsible for each of them, but we can get into sort of political theory later if we want to. Then there's this group that are politically homeless. Now they're homeless because they've changed and the conditions have changed. They feel like something's gone on in them. For a lot of these people that I know and think a lot about, their own faith has felt like it's been important to them, and the political identity they had, often in republicanism, seems to have violated it. And they were basically told, you can follow your faith or you can follow the Republican Party, but you got to choose. And they're choosing their faith. Other people are politically homeless for other reasons. Now, this is not to say that they're not going to vote. It's not to say they're not, but how they view themselves and the narrative they tell themselves about why they did what they did. So the question is it best to find someone in one of these places, or is liminality, homelessness, political homelessness, a good thing? Is it good enough for people to be unrooted, unplaced on the criterion here? And I think that it is. I don't think the goal should be to land somebody in one of the parties. I think the goal is for people to engage as political figures in the civic engagement with the common good in mind. So while you're forming a political identity, while you're forming interest in being a part of a political party, can you form a political identity that begins, middles, and ends with the demand that what's good for all should be good for all, right? Like we all do better when we all do better, that there's something common and there's something good about this. And what I've been surprised at over all these years of conversation that we've been in on this one is the number of people who say, I don't buy common and I don't buy good. What I buy is power. So it's not about getting everybody or thinking about commonality. It's about thinking about how do we have enough that we have political power to move a particular agenda forward. And not particularly about good, but just about possible. So it's about power and possibility, not about common and good. Now, that might be a decision that a politician needs to make, but I think as voters, and I would suggest even as politicians, that they should really say that you can carry a very ruthless and straightforward and honest narrative about politics at the same time that you are thinking about what is common and what is good. And there's actually a fight and a debate in political theory worlds about common and good. I mean, it sounds great. I mean, we were in an organization called Vote Common Good, and people hear it, they're like, well, that's what I like. I wish we could do that. And then you start to root that out, and people are like, oh, I don't know if I can think about it that way. So I'm not suggesting this is a third party. You said it much better than I ever would, but it's an approach that a person has to themselves, politics, and one another. That's what common good, a common good criteria is about, seems to me.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that, and so I wonder if this political homelessness this for those and listen, and I'm kind of watching some of the comments in the chat, and there's some people that like this idea of political homelessness is not resonating with them at all. And okay, so like that's not your identity. That's not where you're at. You got to recognize that there are people that are feeling this though. Like we're not saying this is right or wrong, this is good or bad. We're simply trying to observe what is so we can engage it in the most effective way. And so the question I've got is this political homelessness? Is this a permanent situation for some folks, or is it a temporary situation because of the conditions on the ground? And I would imagine, for some people, it's going to the answer is both. There's going to be some people that it's temporary and some people that it's permanent. But I wonder, like, the majority of folks, are we seeing just this, like, there's people that are going to come home to the Republican Party and whatever it looks like post-Trump? Or is there going to be a migration where, there's people crossing the desert right now, but they're eventually going to, enter into the promised land of the Democratic Party? Is that going to be the case? Or are we seeing something where we've got 40 years of wandering in the wilderness before these folks, find something different, and this generation has to die off before the next one can find a home? To push a biblical metaphor there. It's going to be interesting to see, how all of that takes shape.
So what? This morning I saw a piece of an interview with Lindsey Graham.
Yeah,
and it was emblematic of this conversation, I thought. So
yes.
So we're going to play it. It's an Axios interview. It's 1 minute long. So if you would rather not tolerate a lot of Lindsey Graham in your life, this is less than a minute long total. But I think he sort of gets at something, right? And now if you aren't familiar with Lindsey Graham, or if you are very familiar, just pause for a minute for the people who aren't. Lindsey Graham is a very well-known senator from South Carolina, has had a lot of influence and a lot of power as a public face of Republicanism for 25 years, for a generation in politics. So he's someone who takes his role very seriously as a public face and feature and liaison from a particular version of Republicanism. And he has moved all over the place in these last number of years. I mean, he is
and
just
even before that. And yeah, I mean, he has famously been a member of, like, the Gang of Eight, which was working on a immigration deal back in the early 2000s. He has been someone who has at times been a conservative ideologue, and other times been a John McCain. He has been Robin to John McCain's Batman in Republican, Mavericks. And he was loudly anti-Trump during the primary, and then became one of Trump's biggest and most vocal and most loyal supporters in the Senate. So, I mean, here's a guy, he's someone who has been all over the map and always has been, both in terms of tactics and in terms of ideology. He is someone who is party loyal first and ideologically loyal second.
Well, this is what that's well said, because this is what the context is to understand this, that what Lindsey Graham is saying, and you can go on YouTube and find this same clip. You can listen to the full 2-minute version. I just edited out 1 minute. Or you could go to Axios and watch the entire interview, which is even more intense. But what Lindsey Graham is doing here, I think, is helpful as an illustration of how some people view their politics. He's basically trying to save the Republican Party in his view, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I think what happens when someone becomes so connected to their brand, to the party, and everything else moves, you start making mental deals with others and yourself that look blatantly partisan and foolish to those who don't see the world the way you do. In fact, the interviewer at one point Lindsey Graham says, if you think this is all about just me getting elected, that I support Trump, then you don't understand me. And the interviewer says, yeah, I don't understand you. That's why I'm asking you. Like, I don't get what you're doing. What are you doing? And so that question leads to this response that comes from Lindsey Graham. And I think there's a lot of people who are in this. So I think this is worth us sort of kicking around. So here it is.
Try to get the leader of the movement, who has got lots of problems facing him and the party, and see if we can make a go of it. Mitt Romney didn't do it. John McCain didn't do it. There's something about Trump. There's a dark side and there's some magic there. And what I'm trying to do is just harness the magic. To me, Donald Trump is sort of a cross between Jesse Helms, Ronald Reagan, and P.T. Barnum. I mean, it's just this bigger than life deal. He could make the Republican Party something that nobody else I know could make it. It could make it bigger. He could make it stronger. He could make it more diverse. And he also could destroy it.
Okay, so there it is. So that's Lindsey Graham saying, look, there's something about Trump that I think would be really great for our party. I'm trying to just work on the magic and keep the dark stuff away. Every person whether it's your therapist, your best friend, your spiritual teacher, will tell you that doesn't work. You are not going to rip out the wheat from the tares here. You're not going to separate those things. And this kind of, like, my concern is not for the common good. It's for how could we find a shortcut to build our party? Yeah. I think there's a possibility we could use this guy to build our party. And this is part of what makes that, if you sort of look at the group of the Republican frustrated or the people going up into the Democratic Party, seem more likely. But I think what it's actually doing is creating political homelessness, where people say to themselves, I can't find myself in that category any longer.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you hear Lindsey Graham say, he thinks Donald Trump can make the Republican Party more diverse. Like, come on. Yeah, yes. There's right after he mentions Jesse Helms as an example,
Yes.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know Jesse Helms was a Southern lawmaker who was a heightened segregationist for a long time, and then started to function in a non-segregationist way at the end of his life in a way that didn't match the level of his segregation. Like, he was a complex figure that is sort of carries the darkest parts of separation in this country. He was essential to the Southern strategy of separating whites and blacks and making politics about race in a really terrible way.
Yeah. So, it's just hilarious that he kind of cites those two things kind of back to back, which I think shows a certain amount of, like, self-delusion on his part. I think, when we look at this taxonomy that you've got, Doug, and the Republican frustrated, we've focused on and thought about the kind of the never Trumpers as the Republican frustrated. I think what Lindsey Graham recognizes is that there is a whole lot of Republican frustrated on the other side. It's the flip side of the same coin. And it's the MAGA folks that are just as frustrated with establishment Republicans, country club Republicans, Bill Weld Republicans as anybody else. And he thinks, he's calculating that there are more of them than there are, than the more moderate Republicans, that there are more of the MAGA types who are frustrated, and he's trying to rein them in, hold them in. And I think he's calculating that Donald Trump is the key to keeping the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing of the party in line, rather than it fracturing. I think we can see this on both ends of the political spectrum. On the left, on the far left, the leftist progressive types, and the far right. I grew up in religious fundamentalism, where it was about believing a certain way, talking a certain way, acting a certain way, thinking a certain way, looking a certain way. And what happens in fundamentalism is over time, fundamentalism tends to turn in on itself. Mm-hmm. And when you have to separate from some people, like, you eventually find more and more reasons to keep separating until you're left with a very small group. And I think we see that on the far extremes of the political spectrum. That I think what Lindsey Graham is afraid of is that, like, over time it's going to be okay. Like, and we see this already. Mitch McConnell's no longer acceptable to the MAGA crowd.
Yes, right.
Which there's some of us, like, at another point on the spectrum that we look at that and go, wait a minute, you don't like Mitch McConnell either? Like, yeah. But it's for completely different reasons. There are purity tests and loyalty tests that get layered on, that I think what Lindsey Graham is terrified of is that kind of cannibalization that can happen on the far right that would be really damaging to the Republican Party. And he's trying to I think he kind of feels like the Never Trumper group is small enough that if they go, they go. But he's trying to hold together the Patriot wing, as they would say, the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing of the party.
Well, that's a very gracious reading of what he's doing. You might be right. Maybe it's just that calculation, but I don't know. It feels to me like so much of what's happened since the election and since January 6th, the Christian nationalist funded insurrection and riot at the Capitol, should tell us what fruit is going to come from the tree of MAGA. Yeah. And the idea that you're going to just try to incorporate that in and not call that out and call it into something else and try to move the center of political life is, to me, the reason why I have to abandon republicanism right now. Because if that's the strategy, that's what you're going to do, as opposed to, that's not about the common good. Like, look, Marco Rubio came out last week with something where he's got some economic theory that he says is economics for the common good. He's trying to use common good language, which I found particularly noticeable, maybe a tad bit irritating. But he's trying to use common good language, right, and trying to say let's have a different criteria rather than big or small government, and say like something about common good. I wish he would. My gosh, I would welcome anyone who wants to consider the common good as their voting criteria. And I think it has to begin with, we all do better when we all do better. If you're not comfortable with that, if you're comfortable with the way we get to the common good is that some people do better, and then after they do better, then we'll make sure that other people, like, we're gonna the way this works is that we're gonna let this sort of trickle through the system of high level of benefit for some, and then they'll get 100% of benefit, then the next level will get 40% of benefit, and then the next level will get 10%, but everybody will do a little bit better. That version of economics, politics, and all the rest of this is what I think we're facing. Now, I could make a strong argument as to why I think Democrats are doing the very best job that between the political parties and between the political philosophies right now to approach common good. But it's not really about which team is up at any moment. And I mean, this would be like, if we went into that conversation, it would be like you saying to me, like, hey, I know you're not really an NFL fan, but can I tell you about like the scoring percentage that the Cleveland Browns had this year that got them all the way to the whatever game they got to in the playoffs? And
yes,
I'm not a fan. I don't care how good they are in relationship to the other teams. This is what happens in our politics. The reason voting is down, the reason information level is down, the reason people say don't talk about politics is because so many of us feel outside of that world. We hang around some people that know a lot, and the conversation doesn't really go anywhere because it becomes very niche-y, like someone talking about a kind of sports that you're not into. And that's what's happening to our politics. So if there's a way that our politics could even become more public, more of a public good, and again, I think this is deeply influenced by the same thoughts on spirituality. Like, boy, if we only do our spirituality, like for me as a Christian pastor, if I only do Christianity in a private group with those who already adhere to it, I think I've recast it as a private enterprise for some of us who've crossed some sort of purity boundary to be in, as opposed to it being a public endeavor that a whole lot of us are going to do. And I would frankly just like common good to have a common good philosophy to mean that politics is public discourse. It's public engagement. It's one anotherism, right? It involves everybody all the time, and you make your arguments, and then you talk about why your particular strategy is good. Like I could give you. Literally, I have them. I've gotten them from the White House lists of why how the Biden administration is doing a terrific job right now, and I would declare a terrific job. Some people are, and I hear from them regularly, are reminding me from their vantage point why the Biden administration is not. We can have that debate and not deal with a common good philosophy of politics, or we could have that debate and deal with a common good philosophy of politics. This is the thing. I'm not saying we're functioning at a higher level. It's a different conversation to have about politics. It's the other part of the conversation about politics. Maybe that's a better way to say it. It's not different. It's just the part that seems to be left out so often. It's the part. Yeah, do this, and then I want to give one last little illustration of this.
And I think it's the part that is missing, that is needed. That like there's something more meaningful about a conversation about the common good that transcends just the very kind of surface level what's good for me. Like when you start talking about what's the common good and how do these policies, how do these initiatives, how do these ideas impact that's a conversation changer in a way that we desperately need.
Yeah. So I have behind me, I'll put it up here. I have behind me on the wall a sign back here that's a little blurry to read because I've got a fancy camera that does this kind of thing. But what it says on it is, I will vote faith, not fear, hope, not hate, love for all. I will vote common good. So these are yard signs that we put out and traveled around the country with and sold. And so a couple of stories. One, we had one out in our front yard, and our UPS driver, who's our most frequent, sort of on the normal route, when we're not having stuff rushed to us with Amazon Prime. But the most normal person said, "Hey, I love that sign. Do you think I could get one?" And so I gave him one. Right, ran into him a couple of months ago now after the election, and he said, "Man, that sign was really great. I live." In his case, he said, "I live up in Anoka." Said heart of Trump area. And it really allowed me to have a whole conversation. And so many of my neighbors would come up and say, "That's what I think too." Right. So there's this and then they end up talking about that they're voting for the totally opposite candidate. Right. We were at an event in Pennsylvania outside of Pittsburgh, and a particular person was there to protest the view that the candidate for president, Joe Biden, the candidate for Congress, Connor Lamb, and that we, as Vote Common Good, had around abortion. She was an anti-abortion protester. They were there for hours. They were very aggressive. She said to me at one point, I said, "I'm sure we agree on lots of pro-life issues. Like I'm anti-war, I'm anti-gun, I'm pro-support of poverty initiatives." She said, "None of that has anything to do with being pro-life. In fact, and this is a quote, if you or any of your Black Lives Matter loving friends broke into my house, I'd shoot you dead with my own gun myself. And I said, well, that's a real thing, right?
Very pro-life.
So we have this conversation. Yeah, we're disagreeing, we're talking, it's going on for a long time. And then she says, but can I take one of those signs home? What are the faith? I will vote faith, not fear, hope, not hate, love, not lies. Can I take one of those home? And I said, well, yeah, but you got to make a donation, because at our event, you had to make a donation. She goes, walks over to her car, gets out $20, comes over, makes a $20 donation, and goes home with the sign. And I was thinking, like, what is it? So we couldn't be more opposite, right? She is literally at this event to protest what we're doing. She is now spending time and energy, was there for hours, spending all this energy trying to tell me how I should be in the world, and me trying to engage with her on how I think the world ought to be. And then she says, but I want to take that home. Now, this is not the. I think this is tapping into something common goodery, right? She liked this idea as I will vote for common good, and I'm going to be faith, hope, and love instead. So common good, it's not as easy as like, well, once you buy into what's good for, well, we all do better when we all do better or something like that, then you're necessarily going to line up somewhere else. But it gives us a different place to orient the conversation. Now, I don't think we're coming together on anything, certainly not the candidates, certainly not our policy positions and all the rest. But there was a sense in which she said, I will contribute financially. And we said, you can take one of these signs home, and there's something there. And those two experiences have sat inside of me for months and months now, and I'm not sure what to do with them. But I think somewhere this is at the heart of people who feel like, even if I'm in a political party, I don't know if I totally feel at home there or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, let us know what you're thinking about all this. If you're somebody that listens just on the podcast version, you can send a note to us over at podcast@votecommongood.com. We love getting those. Really does mean a lot to us. And if you're here on the chat, chime in. By the way, Ann from Fargo, if you're still listening, we're looking for somebody in Fargo to help us with a project. So if you're still listening, would you message me separately, and I'll try to also reach out and message you, because we're working on something that caught my eye when I saw that you were on there. Good to have all the rest of you. Rob, did you have a final comment?
I just say, people that might be interested in getting a sign now, votecommongood.com.
That's right. If you do want one of those signs that people would say, I agree with that, but how could you vote for that person? Feel free. We'd love to. We'd love to have you. Oh, look at Dan. Look at producer Dan throwing a little music in here for the live stream people that they get it. They picked it up. Hey, good to have you all around. On Wednesdays we talk about faith. We're joined by 3 other pastors. I'm joined by 3 other pastors: Stephanie Spalding, Laura Truax, Dominique Gilliard. That's tomorrow. On Thursday, we got a really special thing coming for you on Thursday, where we talk about particular issues that are happening in our days, and then we talk science on Fridays. So it's a daily podcast. We'd love for you to be part of this. If you want to chip in, you want to help make this, signs, other things we do possible, go to votecommongood.com. There's a donate button. All the money goes to make all of this kind of thing possible. We'd love to have you be part of it all. So thank you so much. We appreciate you being part of the podcast. Appreciate you being a part of the live stream, and we will see you tomorrow morning.